Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. Today's case is slightly different to our usual narrations, as there has been no resolution and the outcome still hangs in the balance. Sorry to sound a little bit bossy, but may I suggest that you watch today's case with no other distractions, as there really is a great deal to take in. Also, please subscribe, as there will be updates to this case ongoing, and that way you will see them. So, the case was recently tried at Norfolk Superior Court in Dedham, Massachusetts, and ended in a mistrial due to a deadlocked jury. The Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, who are convinced that they have found the guilty party, have stated that they will be seeking a retrial. Whilst the case is the subject of a great deal of media attention both in Massachusetts and throughout the United States, it is less well known in other parts of the world. So, as always, I will try to detail the facts that I have researched as impartially as possible in order to reflect the information that has been put forward by the prosecution and also the defence teams. I would then be fascinated to hear your thoughts and opinions as to what you believe actually happened in this case in the comments section below. So let's start today with an outline of the events of the 28th and 29th of January 2022, before moving on to look at the information that has been presented by those who believe that the defendant is guilty and the counter-arguments of those who are claiming her innocence. On Friday, the 28th of January 2022, a group of friends were out drinking at C.F. McCarthy's Bar in Canton, a town of around 24,000 people, about 20 miles south of Boston, Massachusetts. This group included, amongst others, 41-year-old Karen Reed, her boyfriend John O'Keefe, a 46-year-old Boston police officer, fellow police officer Brian Albert, and Brian's sister-in-law Jennifer McCabe. The group left McCarthy's Bar at around 11 p.m. that evening and headed across the street to the Waterfall Bar and Grill. They stayed there for around an hour before many of them headed to Brian's home on Fairview Road, which was less than 2 miles away, to continue the party. It was Brian's son's 23rd birthday on the 29th, and the group planned to join him for some early hours celebrations. The weather that night was horrendous. New England was experiencing a major storm with heavy snowfall and blizzard-like conditions. Canton was being covered in a blanket of more than 20 inches of snow, with temperatures dropping to 12 degrees. Karen and John travelled to Brian's house in Karen's black Lexus SUV. Karen was driving despite having consumed a significant amount of alcohol that evening. She didn't want to attend the party because she was having stomach issues, so parked up outside Brian's house to drop John off before heading home. At around 5 a.m. on the 29th of January, Karen became concerned that John had not returned home. Karen called Jennifer, who had been with them the previous evening, to see if Jennifer knew where John was. She did not. Another friend, Kerry Roberts, picked up Karen and Jennifer to go and look for John. When they arrived back at Brian's home at around 6 o'clock that morning, they found John face up and unresponsive in the snow on the ground outside Brian's house. In a panic, Karen laid on top of his body in an attempt to warm him up. She attempted to provide CPR. John was rushed to the Good Samaritan Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 7:59 a.m. John had been with the Boston Police Department for 16 years, and his death came as an utter shock to the people who knew him. Police Superintendent-in-Chief Gregory Long issued a statement saying that John was a kind person dedicated to his family and will be greatly missed by his co-workers and anyone who had the privilege of meeting him. We are stunned and saddened and offer whatever support we can to John's family. John's family also issued a statement through the Boston Police Department, which read as follows: John was not only a dedicated police officer, he was an exemplary guardian, son, brother, uncle and friend. When John's sister passed away, and then her husband did as well a short time later, John welcomed the opportunity to raise his beloved niece and nephew and build a home and a life around their needs. It is heartbreaking for us to suddenly be talking about him in the past tense. An autopsy was completed on the 31st of January 2022, which concluded that John's cause of death was hypothermia and blunt impact injuries to the head. It was clear that he had been in the cold for a significant amount of time before being found and transported to the hospital. Exactly how John had ended up in the snow, having sustained trauma to his head, was unclear, and an investigation got underway. On the 1st of February 2022, John's girlfriend, Karen Reed, was arrested and charged with manslaughter, motor vehicle homicide, and leaving the scene of a motor vehicle collision which had caused the death. She was taken to the Blue Hills barracks for processing and appeared in court the following day, where she pled not guilty to the charges brought against her. 4 months later, on the 9th of June 2022, Karen was indicted on a new charge by a Norfolk County grand jury. The charge was second-degree murder. If she is found guilty of this, she could face a maximum sentence of life in prison under Massachusetts law. Karen, who was an equity analyst at a financial firm and part-time professor of finance at Bentley University in Waltham, was released on $50,000 cash bail. The prosecution and defence began their preparations for trial, working on two very different descriptions of the same event. The prosecution believed that John and Karen's relationship was in tatters, and that after arriving at Brian's house that night, she made a 3-point turn, rammed John with her car, and left him to freeze to death in the snow. David Yannetti for the defence team called the charges against Karen a tremendous reach, and believes that Karen is being framed in a cover-up, which they say involves Brian Albert, a now retired Boston police officer who owned the house where John's body was found, and that investigating officers are in on the scheme to frame Karen. High-profile California lawyer Alan Jackson, who represented Kevin Spacey in Nantucket in 2019, was brought onto the team, claiming that the investigation had been infected with personal relationships and conflicts of interests and cover-ups, and we intend to shine as much light on it as possible to stop this very obviously compromised prosecution in its tracks. So let's take a look at the arguments for and against each scenario in this case. According to the prosecution, the police established that several people recalled seeing a dark SUV matching Karen's pulling up outside Brian's home just after midnight on the evening in question. The SUV remained outside for around 15 minutes before leaving. No one came into the house at this time. When Jennifer, Brian's sister-in-law, and others left the house at about 1:30 a.m, there had been no sign of John since they had all been at the bar together. Karen's friend, Kerry Roberts, who helped look for John the following morning, said that she believed that Karen was still drunk from the previous evening and that Karen did not remember the previous night. Karen allegedly told Kerry, "I wonder if he is dead. It's snowing. He got hit by a plough." When the women arrived at Brian's house, Karen immediately spotted John in the snow. By the time the emergency services arrived, Karen's face was bloody from attempting to administer CPR, and she was near hysterical. When Katie McLaughlin, a paramedic who attended the scene, asked Karen whether she knew the causes of John's injuries, Karen allegedly looked at one of her friends and said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." However, since then it has been queried exactly what she did say that morning. Was it that she had hit him, or could I have hit him? Others recall hearing her say, "Is that my boyfriend? Is he dead?" Or, "This is all my fault. I did this." The defence would later argue that Katie's story had changed over time and attempted to tie this to her connection to members of Brian's family. She was asked how well she knew Brian's daughter, Caitlin Albert. Katie confirmed that she went to school with someone by that name. It was eventually established that Katie and Caitlin had numerous mutual friends, but they were not close, and that she had seen Caitlin occasionally in the years following high school. Karen was taken to the hospital at around 9 a.m. that morning, where she had her bloods taken. The results of this blood test showed that her blood alcohol level was at, or just below, the legal driving limit at that time. This indicated that it would have been significantly higher when she was driving the night before. Further investigation would conclude that she had consumed at least 9 vodka and sodas the previous evening. However, the bartender would later state that no one in the group seemed overly drunk. The prosecution presented extensive details about the fact that John and Karen's relationship was extremely strained and John had wanted to call it quits. The pair had reconnected during the pandemic and had been together for about 2 years at the time of John's death. John relied on Karen to help with the care of his niece and nephew, who he had been raising following the death of his sister and her husband, something which apparently caused tension between the pair. The niece and nephew told investigators that Karen and John argued frequently, approximately 2 to 3 times a week, and that during a recent argument over groceries, John had said that he needed a break from Karen. John's niece also stated that the week before his death, John had told Karen that their relationship was not healthy and had run its course. Evidence was also presented of a voicemail which was found on John's phone, in which Karen had screamed, "John, I effing hate you," called him a pervert, and accused him of cheating on her. About a month before his death, John and Karen, along with his niece and nephew, joined friends on a trip to Aruba, during which it was claimed that Karen had accused John of kissing someone else. They had argued for about 20 minutes in the hotel room in front of the children. The defence, however, claimed that on the night of John's death, there did not appear to be any problems between the couple, and they were seen being loving and affectionate towards each other. They were happy and excitedly planning a holiday together. Additionally, a man by the name of Brian Higgins, who was a friend of John's and who had been present at Brian Albert's home the night of John's death, admitted that he had flirty texts with Karen, who had surprised him with a kiss on the lips about 2 weeks earlier. When Brian Higgins had asked Karen if she was happy in her relationship with John, Karen allegedly told him that John had cheated on her during the Aruba trip. When questioned by the defence about this, Brian Higgins admitted that he had destroyed his phone for unrelated reasons a few months after Karen was charged with John's murder. In terms of physical evidence, the police search of the area outside Brian's home uncovered a broken cocktail glass consistent with the one John had been holding when he left the bar, as well as several drops of blood. They also found 3 pieces of plastic which appeared to be from the backlights of a car. After Karen's SUV was seized, it was determined that these were consistent with the broken rear light on her vehicle. The prosecution also stated that a forensic specialist who examined Karen's SUV found a dent with chipped paint in the trunk door, a broken tail light and scratches on the bumper, as well as human hair on the rear passenger side quarter panel of the vehicle, and also that embedded within the bumper of that vehicle are pieces of cocktail glass. The prosecution would later say that they had recovered John's DNA from the rear light of Karen's car, and that the hair found on the rear passenger side of the SUV belonged to John. The defence would state that it was forensically determined that no human DNA was detected in relation to the hair. The defence would also go on to argue that there were discrepancies in the way that Karen's SUV was seized and evidence collected. The vehicle was towed to the police station 40 miles away, that's 40, during a blizzard, and as such any evidence would be compromised. The police also had access to the vehicle for 78 unaccounted for minutes and after this time, a second search was completed at Brian's house, and according to David Yannetti from the defence, miraculously revealed for the first time red and white pieces of plastic found on the ground, consistent with the tail light of Ms. Reed's vehicle, the only physical evidence against Ms. Reed in the entire case. Alan Jackson said that the lead investigator indicated that Karen's car had been seized at 5:30 p.m. on the 29th, when video evidence showed that it was actually seized at 4:12 p.m, accounting for the 78-minute time difference. The defence further noted that one piece of plastic that was recovered at the scene was not a match to the vehicle, whilst a witness for the prosecution testified that she could reconstruct the plastic fragments she was asked to examine into a bigger piece that she said was a physical match to the rear light from Karen's car. The defence also challenged the prosecution's conclusion that John's injuries had been caused by being hit by a vehicle. They argued that the medical examiner's findings instead describe a man who was subjected to a violent assault, stating that John had been beaten severely and left for dead, having sustained blunt force injuries to both sides of his face as well as to the back of his head, and that John had defensive wounds on his hands consistent with a brutal fight, deep scratches or bite marks to his right upper arm and forearm. They put forward the theory that John had been badly beaten inside the house and said that the injuries to John's arms were consistent with being attacked by a dog. There was a German Shepherd, also known as an Alsatian, in the house at the time of the attack. They say that after the attack, John was dumped outside to die, and they set about framing Karen for the crime. The defence included pictures of marks on John's arms in court filings, which they say are consistent with a dog attack. The prosecution argued that evidence submitted to a veterinary forensic laboratory concluded that there was no canine DNA associated with the swabs taken from John's clothing in the area of his injuries. The defence countered this by suggesting that there was no indication as to what part of John's shirt the DNA actually came from. The prosecution reiterated what the medical examiner had previously said, where they had described Mr. O'Keefe's right arm injuries as scratches caused by a blunt object. The doctor noted that they appeared in a linear pattern. The doctor detailed that she observed no signs of an altercation or fight from her examination of Mr. O'Keefe. With autopsy results remaining confidential in Massachusetts, the jury were left with the two sides' different interpretations of the findings. Additionally, the prosecution stated that 12 people had corroborated the fact that John had not entered Brian's house that night. The defence went on to say that the dog had mysteriously been found a new home out of state 5 months after the attack, and in addition to getting rid of the dog, Brian also remodelled his basement within months of John's death and then went on to sell the home. A home which was never searched following the events of that night. Alan Jackson claimed that evidence is being destroyed right under our nose. At trial, it emerged that the police department did not have evidence containers as they investigated the crime scene, so had to improvise. Officers scooped up frozen coagulated blood in red Solo drinking cups that they got from a neighbour and placed them in a brown Stop and Shop bag. Additionally, the defence brought to the court's attention that after John's body was discovered, the police officer spoke to Brian Albert and his wife Nicole for around 20 minutes in their home. The officer did not record the interview, and he did not search the home because he had no probable cause to do so. He did not ask for anyone's phone, nor separate the people in the home, or take notes of his discussion with Brian and Nicole. The prosecution stated that microscopic pieces of plastic from the rear light were found in John's clothing. However, during the defence's cross-examination about the recovery of the plastic and other items found as the snow began to melt, they queried why this had not been put into a report until November 2023, over a year and a half later. They also highlighted how clothes that John had been wearing and were retrieved from the hospital were not processed into evidence until the 4th of February, which was 6 days after the crime. A huge piece of evidence for the defence, which they stated would not only clear Karen's name but would implicate others in John's death, was the discovery that Brian Albert's sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, completed a search on her phone at 2:27 a.m. on the 29th of January, several hours before John was found. The search was "How long to die in cold?" Karen's defence team stated that there is simply no innocent explanation for McCabe's search at that time. This evidence unequivocally exonerates Karen because it establishes that individuals who were in the house at Fairview Road that night were aware that John was dying in the snow before Karen even knew he was missing. An analysis of Jennifer's phone by defence experts also showed that the Google search was intentionally deleted, as well as communications between Jennifer, Brian Albert and Brian's wife Nicole. The defence claimed that the prosecution withheld this evidence for over a year, stating that it's unthinkable that the prosecution would have McCabe's cell phone in their possession for more than a year, do a forensic analysis on that phone, and then fail to turn over this exculpatory evidence. But that's exactly what happened. It makes you wonder what else that prosecution has failed to turn over to the defence. We will not rest until we have uncovered all the evidence which will establish that the prosecution of Karen was a miscarriage of justice from the start. Whilst at first glance this would seem damning to the prosecution's case, the prosecution explained that the search was actually made at Karen's behest, when John had been found in the snow. The 2:27 a.m. timestamp for the search was not accurate due to the way in which the phone data is written into the phone's database. They went on to say that at 2:27 a.m. Jennifer had conducted a Google search for her daughter's basketball team, and she used the same open tab a few hours later to search about hypothermia, therefore making the defence's claim that this unequivocally exonerated Karen redundant. The defence would allege that the lead state police investigator, Michael Proctor, had a conflict of interest, as Michael is a close friend of Brian Albert, the owner of the house where John's body was found, and that the extended families of both Michael Proctor and Brian Albert were known to each other and had attended events such as family weddings. At the trial, Michael was grilled about derogatory text messages that he had sent about Karen during the investigation and made to read them aloud, including a text stating that he hoped Karen would kill herself, and also that he joked that he was reviewing the contents of her phone but hadn't found any nudes yet. The Massachusetts State Police Department announced that Michael Proctor, who had been the subject of an internal investigation into a potential violation of department policy due to allegations that he was not truthful with his relationships with people he had identified as witnesses in the case, had been relieved of duty shortly after the end of the trial and subsequently suspended without pay. The defence filed a motion for Judge Beverly Cannoni to be removed from the case on the claim that she personally knew people involved in the case. The judge refused, stating that the motion for her recusal was not credible and all 4 points raised in the defendant's motion are without merit. Earlier in that hearing, defence attorneys held up poster boards showing enlarged screenshots of a text message exchange and a Venmo transaction that purportedly showed the judge's connections to people involved in the case, something which the judge said was untrue. Alan Jackson stated that the district attorney, Michael Morrissey, had publicly stated that any suggestion of a pre-existing relationship between the Proctors and the McCabes, or the Proctors and the Alberts, is false. But Karen's legal team has presented photographs demonstrating what they say is unassailable evidence of a personal relationship between Michael Proctor and the witnesses, including a 2012 picture of Michael in a wedding party with Albert Proctor's then 10-year-old nephew, and also a photograph of Jennifer McCabe's car outside the Proctors' home on the night of September the 25th, 2022, for an off-the-books meeting. The prosecution claimed that their families only have a distant connection. Federal prosecutors and the Boston office of the FBI had taken the extraordinary step of conducting an inquiry into Karen's prosecution whilst it was ongoing. The defense would go on to claim that crash reconstruction experts hired by federal authorities determined that John's injuries were inconsistent with being struck by a vehicle. They said that this information was contained in the thousands of pages that Acting U.S. Attorney Joshua S. Levy's office provided to the defense and prosecution. However, the prosecution would state that the federal materials are largely consistent with the prosecution's theory of the case. There was no suggestion of a third-party culprit, no suggestion of cover-up of evidence, no suggestion from the 12 civilian witnesses' testimony that we have received, or transcripts of theatre testimony. All of them confirmed that Mr. O'Keefe never entered the Canton home. There was no fight. There was no eyewitness to the circumstances that led to Mr. O'Keefe's death. Whilst the prosecution acknowledge and the defence say that they have proved links between witnesses to varying degrees, it should be considered that many of the people involved in this case grew up in Canton and never left. Old friendships remained from school days and new ones formed over children of the parties involved. The defence claimed that Brian Higgins, who had exchanged flirty texts with Karen, and Colin Albert, Brian Albert's 20-year-old nephew, were alternate suspects who could have participated in what they claim is the assault on John. Colin said that he had been at the house that evening but left around 12:10 a.m. and did not see John. The defence portrayed him as hot-headed and aggressive and suggested that his parents were not being truthful when detailing the time their son returned home that morning. It should be noted that Brian Albert, Brian Higgins and Colin Albert did not have any visible injuries following John's death, which may possibly have occurred if there had been an altercation. Whilst the conflicting evidence in this case is something which occurs between prosecution and defence all of the time, the cover-up accusations and way in which the case has divided opinion and become a media circus certainly is not. The case has split the town of Canton. The residents of this divided community voted 903 to 800 in favour of auditing the Canton Police Department over the case. Police Chief Helena Rafferty welcomed the outside review, saying that it will end the wild speculation over the department's handling of the investigation. The meeting approved $200,000 to hire an independent consulting firm. As more rumblings of a police cover-up were made public, Karen gained increasing support from the general public. Facebook pages gained thousands of followers, and a fund for Karen's legal expenses had raised nearly $250,000 by the end of 2023. She was often greeted by a large group of supporters outside the courthouse during pre-trial hearings, holding banners stating "Free Karen Read" and "Honk for Justice." At times, Karen's supporters began booing and shouting at John's grieving parents, brother and friends. With this in mind, a 200-foot buffer zone was established around the courthouse. Karen's case sparked an interest in 41-year-old Aidan Kearney, the controversial blogger better known as Turtle Boy. He posted hundreds of articles about her story and sold "Free Karen Read" merchandise with the Turtle Boy logo, whilst raising money for Karen's legal defence fund. With a large following on his website, he accused investigators of framing her, naming it the Canton cover-up. He posted multiple YouTube videos where he accused witnesses of participating in the crime and went on to publicise some of these witnesses' home addresses, work and telephone numbers. He also organised a rolling road rally in which demonstrators travelled in a convoy of vehicles to the homes of witnesses in Karen's case and confronted another witness at the pizza shop which they owned before going on to urge his online followers to call the business and place orders without picking them up. Aidan also illegally accessed vehicle information for witnesses with the help of a civilian police dispatcher. On more than one occasion on his website, he said that he was hoping that his reporting would influence the jury pool, adding that he had staked his entire reputation on Karen's innocence. In October 2023, he was arrested on charges of witness intimidation and conspiracy. He pled not guilty and was released on his own recognizance with an order to stay away from the witnesses. Even though he had this order to stay away, he was still allowed to attend the court proceedings so that he could continue to cover the case, as he had a journalistic interest in reporting it. When further charges were added in December and Aidan's bail revoked, his lawyer claimed that the authorities were trying to throw the book at him, and we all know why they're trying to throw the book at him. It's because he's actually making progress in this investigation. Later, a Massachusetts State Police affidavit alleged that Karen had fed information to Aidan in 189 phone calls, lasting over 40 hours over a period of 7 months. This information included personal details about witnesses in the case, autopsy photographs, crime scene photographs, images of her car, and the 911 call made when John's body was found. This could lead to Karen, as well as Aidan, facing witness intimidation charges. As the build-up to the court case continued to play out in both traditional and social media, Karen made an appearance on an episode of Dateline, again claiming that she was innocent and had been set up. Also, when asked on the courthouse steps if she was stating that she didn't commit the crime, Karen replied, "We know who did it, we know, and we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know." Shortly afterwards, the Norfolk County District Attorney Michael Morrissey took the extremely unusual step of issuing a video statement outside of court. He condemned the harassment of witnesses as baseless and disputed many of the defence's claims, stating that innuendo is not evidence. False narratives are not evidence. These people are not part of a conspiracy and have not engaged in any cover-up. To have them accused of murder is outrageous. To have them harassed and intimidated based on false narratives and accusations is wrong. They are witnesses doing what our justice system asks of them. John's supporters would wear yellow pins stating "Justice for JJ", whilst Karen's supporters, after being banned from wearing Free Karen Reid t-shirts, adopted the colour pink to show their support. Jury selection began on the 16th of April 2024 with the obvious hurdles of finding people who did not have an opinion on the case, and the trial began on the 29th of April. The prosecution called almost 70 witnesses, whilst the defence called just 3. Karen did not take the stand. Closing arguments took place on the 25th of June 2024, and the jury began their deliberations. 3 days later, the 6 women and 6 men of the jury sent a note to the judge saying that they were deadlocked. The judge instructed them to continue deliberating. On the 1st of July, the jury sent a further note to the judge stating that they were deeply divided and that they remain deadlocked. The judge then declared a mistrial by hung jury. Since the completion of the trial, it has been reported that the jurors had unanimously concluded that Karen was not guilty of murder or of leaving the scene of the deadly accident, but were deadlocked on the remaining lesser charge of manslaughter before a mistrial was declared. The defence said that the mistrial was announced without questioning the jurors about the individual charges, and hoped to show that the state of Massachusetts cannot retry Karen for murder due to double jeopardy rules. Amongst all the drama of a high-profile court case with the accusations of a police cover-up, it is easy to forget that at the heart of this case was the death of a 46-year-old man who from those who knew him was described as one of the best. John's sister, Kristin, died from an aggressive form of brain cancer in 2013, and 8 months later her husband, Stephen, died unexpectedly from a heart attack. Kristin and Stephen had 2 young children, Kaylee, who was then 6, and Patrick, who was 3. John took on responsibility of raising the children as his own and provided them with a stable, loving home after their worlds had fallen apart. He had been living the life of a bachelor in Dorchester, but moved to Canton, adjusted his lifestyle and work schedule to take care of the children. John's brother Paul is convinced that Karen is responsible for John's death and believed that her facing consequences for this would provide some form of justice to their family, who have suffered so much tragedy. John's family say that his death has been overshadowed by the circus-like atmosphere of Karen's trial. It would seem that the drama in this case shows no signs of letting up anytime soon, and the situation seems to be changing on a daily basis. I shall make an update video in the not too distant future and link it to this one. As I said at the beginning of this video, I would be fascinated to hear your opinions on this case in the comments section below. Please remember to subscribe and click like. That concludes today's story. There won't be a psst or petty crime message today. Thanks for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye.